Well, my name is Gene Cook. I'm going to be conducting the interview today. Our cameraman is Gary Roberts, and your name is
Bessie Adams.
Bessie Adams.
But I've shortened it to Bess. I don't like Bessie. I always told my mother, everybody back in Illinois named their cows or their horses Bessie.
Old Bessie.
So
Yeah.
I was old Bessie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hated
Well, we
it.
can avoid that one.
But
And Bess, how old are you?
I'm 97.
97. What month were you born?
I was born in November 27th,
And you're
1940.
97 years old.
1921. I started to say 43. That was that's something else.
It's like asking me to remember my phone number.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where were you born at?
I was born in Decatur, Illinois. I lived in the same house. My folks moved into it when I was a baby, and I lived there till I got married. I'd never, ever moved. And then when I got married, my husband was stationed down at Scottfield, Illinois, and that was right outside of East St. Louis. And we got married in St. Louis, Missouri on a Saturday night about 9 o'clock in the pastor's home. And the only ones there was my mother and one brother, younger brother and younger sister, and my husband's mother and dad, and my one sister and her husband. They stood up with us, and that was the extent of our
That was the ceremony.
Yeah.
And what year was this again?
What year did I get married? 41.
41. Were there a lot of rumors or a lot of talk going on about Hitler and what he was doing then?
Oh, yeah.
So everybody was kind of in this
Yeah.
wartime frame of mind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when war was first declared, and that was before I was married, and I was at my girlfriend's house, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, and her dad had the radio on and heard that we were at war, and I remember we really didn't realize what it meant, you know, and 'cause I was 18 probably then.
Oh, wow.
'Cause I had just finished high school, and I never went to college. I wasn't college material.
But you got involved in the wartime effort as
Yeah.
most people did then?
Yeah.
Did you go and apply for a job, or were they drafting?
I went to apply.
You went to apply?
Yeah.
And where did you apply?
The first plant I worked at it had been a Firestone factory, and they'd changed it over, and I worked in an office there, and I didn't know much about what was going on, and then I worked in another plant. Way back then, they had bumper guards on cars, and I had run a machine that punched the place for the screw to fasten it to the bumper. And
You were a machinist?
I was a machinist.
There you go.
And I was standing practically on one leg most of the time because we had to keep going with the other foot, you know. And
What kind of shifts were you working? 8 hours, 10 hours?
8 hours.
8 hours?
Yeah. After the war was declared, then I went to this old Firestone place and worked there. And I worked in an office, and then I decided I wasn't happy there, and they put me in the department where we were painting something. I can't remember what we were painting, but I remember I was so aggravated because we sat at a bench, a long bench, and a whole bunch of us, and every so often everybody was smoking, and they would scoot their chairs back away from the paint and take a break and smoke, and I had to keep on working because I wasn't smoking. And I told the boss, I said, this isn't fair. And so he told them they couldn't take the just breaks when he told them, and I could take a break with them. And he treated me good because they had cigarette machines in there, and everybody would, when they filled them up, everybody would run and get in line, you know. And he wasn't allowed to, so he got me to go get his cigarettes for him, and so that
So
way
you were an undercover
yeah,
Comshaw artist?
yeah,
Yeah.
and
And,
then
and a troublemaker, obviously. So when did you go to the ordnance factory? Because at that point in time, that was a big deal. In Northwest St. Louis, they converted several old structures into an ordnance
yeah.
plant.
After we got married there in St. Louis, we had a one-room apartment in East St. Louis, and we didn't know East St. Louis at all, and but we didn't have any money. I think we had about $6 to our name, and I think we paid a couple of dollars a week for this one room, and so one day Harold was on a shift where he worked 24 hours and then he was home 24 hours. And the day he was gone for 24 hours, I said, I've got to go get a job. And so there was a bus that went from East St. Louis over to St. Louis, just went across the bridge, and that was as far as it went. Mm-hmm. And so I got on the bus and went over to St. Louis, and I thought, well, I got to find the employment office. Small town me, you know. We were practically downtown where the bus stopped, and so I started walking down the street looking for the employment office, and I walked along, and once there was the employment office. So I went in, and they found out that I had worked in a factory before, and so they said, well, we've got a good place for you to go, but they have their own employment office, and you'll have to go there. And they told me where to go, and I said, I don't know how to get there. And they put it on an envelope and told me what buses to take and everything to get there. And I got there, and they started examining me and asking me questions and everything, and I had a complete physical, and I was there all day, and didn't even let me stop for lunch. And then all at once they said, well, you're going to go on out to the plant and go to work on the 4 o'clock shift. And I said, well.
Today?
Yeah. I said, I don't know where the plant is. And so they did the same with an envelope, and I think I took 2 different buses, got out to the plant, and they put me to work, and they took my envelope. And so I thought, oh, I don't know how I'm going to get home. And I was getting off at midnight. I thought, how am I going to get home? And I went in the restroom, and I was sitting there crying because here I was, 18 years old, and well, I was 19 then, and I thought, I'm lost, you know. And one of the girls that I was working with, she came into the restroom, and she says, honey, what's the matter with you? And I said, I'm lost. I don't know how to get home. Here I was, an old married woman, and I didn't know how to get home.
Well, there are things we don't think about today.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, because you didn't just go out and get in a car and drive home.
No.
It wasn't the same kind of a deal.
Yeah.
A lot of walking
here
involved.
I was clear in St. Louis. It was all the way across town in St. Louis, too. And this gal came in there, and she said, when I told her what was the matter, she says, just sit right there. I'll be right back. And she went out the door, and she came back in, and she says, come here. And she took me to the door, and she introduced me to a man. And she says, he lives in East St. Louis, and he drives, and he says, you can ride home with him. And I said, oh, great. So I rode home with him, and then so he took me home, and he says, why do you live here? He said, this is a bad neighborhood. And I said, I don't know. And so anyway, it was very nice. He was a married man, and he was very nice. And so then when he got me home, he said, well, can I pick you up in the morning to take you to work? And I said, that'd be great. And then he said, well, if you know any other girls that need a ride, we can, So we ended up with a carload of women.
Carpool?
A carpool. We just paid him so much a week because none of us had cars. And so we did that for several months, and then somehow something came up and we got on different shifts and was working different times. And by then I had a close girlfriend that lived not too far from me in East St. Louis, and she and I were close friends, and she knew the buses to take, so we started riding the bus then, and we rode the bus. But we had to work all 3 shifts. And when we worked from 4 o'clock to midnight, and I'd get off the bus, and it was pitch dark, and I usually had a couple of blocks to go to get to my house, my apartment, and I was scared to death. I ran down the middle of the street.
Well, East St. Louis wasn't then, and it's not a good place to live
Oh,
now.
no.
It's pretty rough in there.
Yeah.
Also, you had did you detect any issues with racism in that period of time?
No.
Okay.
Let
Let me interrupt you a second. I'll give us a little background. The facility that you worked at it covered acres, so it was a big facility.
Yeah, it was.
And it was out off of Goodfellow. That was the name of the major street that it was on. They had thousands of workers there, including blacks and whites. The black people were segregated, kept from the white places of employment.
I don't remember any black people.
Yeah, and in the late 40s, around 44, the black people went on strike because they wanted some of the good jobs. What they did is they hired them to do all of the landscaping as this plant expanded. Once they got the landscaping done, then they were sweeping streets and emptying trash cans, but they weren't letting them do any of the types of labor that you were doing.
Yeah.
So that was an issue then that isn't talked a lot about now, but they did keep people segregated during that period of time.
Yeah.
The plant that you worked in had thousands of people working there.
Yeah.
And they had several thousand security guards. Everything was under security, real tight security because of the ordinance.
Yeah.
That factory manufactured 30 caliber and 50 caliber bullets.
Yeah.
You manufactured them, boxed them, canned them, and then they went into the war to support the war effort.
Yeah.
That plant, eventually when it closed, you guys had produced 6.7 billion rounds of ammunition came out of that one place. You supported and supplied the ammunition for all of the German conflict and the Japanese as well.
Yeah.
So it was a big major deal then.
Yeah.
They had periodically during the course of the operation of the plant, they had layoffs from time to time because what they would do is they were manufacturing the brass that the bullet was constructed from, and they would run out of brass. So you guys had gunpowder, you had the lead bullets, but you didn't have the brass casings to put it together.
Yeah.
So sometimes they'd have layoffs, but it was very active, clear up through 45.
Yeah.
So anyway, just some background on the plant that you worked at, and it was pretty serious business.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what. There's not a lot about safety issues, but everything that you're working with was highly explosive, flammable.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons for the security. The other is just to control the ammunition that you guys were manufacturing.
We had a safety inspector that came along every so often, and we were standing, and I remember I said to the safety man, I said, why can't we have something to sit on to do. He says, no, it'd be too dangerous because if anything happened, you couldn't get out quick enough, you know. And I said, let us try it. So he got us all stools, and we'd sit on those stools. We had one foot here and one here, and we was just sitting there feeding that thing, you know.
Production went up though, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did real good. And then
Tell us what you did. Tell us about making a bullet.
well, we had that big funnel with the gunpowder in it, and it came down in some kind of a tube, and then and we had the bullet was in a something tray and standing up, you know, and then that came down and just went right into it, and we just put the
bullet.
the bullet
Yeah,
in.
because that's the casing.
Yeah.
You put gunpowder in the
and
casing.
we just, it was like this all the time. And one night, when I was working the night shift, and my machine, I looked up all at once, and that big gunpowder thing was on fire. And they always said, if anything happens, just get out. They had a door behind each machine so we could get out. And so this flame went up there, and actually the next room was connected to us, and there was a big long string of us there doing this thing, and all they had big boxes or something full of gunpowder that they came over and put into our thing somehow. I forget now how it was. But anyway, when it caught on fire, I took off running. I went lickety split, and I opened my mouth and tried to yell. Nothing would come out. I said, you know, I've had dreams where I was trying to scream, you know, and I was trying to scream, and I was running, just running like mad. And I got quite a ways down the pathway there. It was like more like a driveway, and I didn't see anybody following me, you know, and I thought, well, where'd everybody go? And so I turned around and slowly walked back to where I was, you know, and they said, where'd you go? We were scared. We didn't know where you were. I said, well, you said to get away from there.
Well, gunpowder is very explosive.
Oh, yeah.
And,
yeah. And
one little spark from something and...
Yeah. And they made me get back onto a machine right away so I wouldn't be afraid. And so I worked a few months. I can't remember how many months afterwards. And then my husband, he says, I don't like you there after that fire and everything. That could happen. And so I don't know how we managed, but he was getting $50 a month. That's what we were living on, was $50 until I got that job. And we were in seventh heaven when I got that job because I was making almost $30 a week.
Oh, wow. You were in big bucks then.
I was in big bucks.
Yeah.
And so we moved 2 or 3 different times. A little bit before I quit working, we moved to Belleville, Illinois. It was closer to the camp. We had a real nice place there. It was the nicest place we had ever had. We had been there, several months when my husband got shipping orders to go overseas. And so and about that time I found out I was pregnant. And
so how many little ones did you end up with?
I had my daughter. My husband took me home, and when he was going to go overseas, and so he took me home, and he had a 30-day furlough, and then in October they shipped him out, and my daughter was born in November then, and he didn't see her till she was almost 2 years old. And but I lived with my sister. My sister lived 2 houses down the street from my parents, and my mother babysat. And when my daughter was 2 months old, I went to work in the plant where I wore that uniform, and it had something to do with the atom bomb, but I never got into that part of the area. It made me a guard, and
So you patrolled
we
buildings?
had, yeah,
or
we had little shacks, and we were up high on the, we had to climb some steps.
like a guard tower?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then every so often, I forget how often, but the sergeant of the guards would come and then we would start. We would go from one shack to the next, move around every so often, all the way around. And by the time we got all the way around, we were back at the main building, the locker room, really. And then we had a break, and then we started around again. Then, and this sergeant, he was an old grouch, and all the girls were in the shacks, and they, and 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's pitch black. You don't need to get so sleepy, and so it's kind of doze off, and somebody would call and say, "Snap to it, he's on the prowl," and and so everybody was wide awake when they got there.
And this guard duty required you to carry a firearm?
Yes.
And how much training did you get?
Not very much.
Just where the trigger was, and how to get bullets in it?
Yeah. I think it was once a month or once every 3 months or something that we had supposed to have pistol practice, and I had never handled a gun before, and I tried to do it, and I just stood there and cried. And so they didn't make me do it anymore. They said, "Well, you're close enough to everybody else."
So you weren't a pistol packing mama then?
I still had to carry the gun.
You still had to carry it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it made a nice paperweight, didn't it?
Yeah. So
Well,
I was still working there when my husband got home, and he was just on furlough. He had 30 days, and then he was going to go to the Pacific coast, Pacific Islands, because he had been in France, and he was headed for over there, and he spent the 30 days at home, and then he was up in northern Illinois at I forget the name of the camp up there, but then he was to be shipped from there. And while he was up there was when Japan surrendered then. And so he never had to go.
So he never had to go.
He never had to go over
Yeah,
there.
because if he'd have gotten those islands.
Yeah. And we celebrated that day, I'm telling you.
Wake, Midway, Kwajalein.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bad places.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So how did you get to Arizona?
When he came home from the service.
Which was, about what year was that?
That was 45.
45?
Yeah. I was living with my sister, and she got word that her husband was coming home, and so she just had a 1-bedroom house, and so we said, well, I had to find a place to live. And so I found an apartment up over a garage that of some friends, and they had made a real nice apartment up there, and I rented that, and then it ended up Harold got home before her husband did, but he got home in a couple of weeks after that, and he was home when the war was over, and so they had a car, had been sitting there, and they got in the car and drove over to where I was, and we went downtown, and everybody was honking their horns and driving up and down the streets and yelling and everything, and it was all really exciting, because then we knew he didn't have to go any farther. And then, but he still It's up there at the camp in the northern part of the state. And my brother-in-law went up there too. And I remember my sister and I took a bus and went up to visit them while they were up there waiting. And they had barracks there, but they wouldn't let us go in the same barracks. I said, here we were married, and they wouldn't let us sleep with our husbands.
Yeah. Things have changed.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So did he take a civilian job then, or
He worked at a factory that my uncle was a boss or something. He kind of got him the job, but he didn't. He wasn't real happy there, and he quit. And then he went to work on the railroad for a while, and he didn't like that. And it just seemed like he just couldn't find what he wanted to do. And see, he had been home about, how many, 2, 3, 4, let's see. Well, he got home in 45, and in 1951, he was reading something. I don't know where he got the magazine, but there was an article in there about a place in Arizona, in Tucson, that a man had a rug cleaning business. And at that time, Harold was working in a plant where they cleaned rugs and curtains and stuff. Mm-hmm. And he'd seen where this guy had a plant for sale in Tucson. And Harold had an uncle and aunt that had moved to Tucson for her health. And they had come back and talked so much about it. So Harold says, you know, I'm going to go see about that job. And so he took the bus and went to Tucson, stayed with his aunt and uncle, and went and talked to this guy, and they made a deal that he would come back and would sell out, and we'd buy this guy's business. And so he came back home, and I remember Illinois, it just seemed like every house had a mouse in it, and 2 or 3, and I was scared to death of them. Mm-hmm. And I had a mouse in the house where I was living, and he went, while he was gone, my younger sister came and stayed with me. I was feeding the baby in the middle of the night and sitting in a chair, and a mouse went running by the doorway that I had to go back to the bedroom in. I sat in the chair the rest of the night with my feet up, as if the mouse.
A big old bad mouse was there.
Yeah. And so he came home. While he was gone, it snowed, and I was out shoveling the driveway so I could get out. And I got the mailman came by and got a postcard from him, and here he was sitting out, laying on outside, laying on this chase thing, you know, and it's short sleeves, and, you know, in the sun. I said, that does it.
I'm out of here.
And so when he came back home and we talked it over, and I was still kind of, you know, I had never been away like that. And then I said, I was telling him about the mouse, how it scared me and everything. And I said, do they have mice in Arizona? And he said, oh, no, they don't have mice. So
no, we have scorpions and centipedes.
Yeah.
And nice things like that.
I said, oh, that does it. So we put our house up for sale. And when he first came home, we bought a house. I was really disappointed about it because I had been saving my money to buy a house when he came home. And I had pictures of, you know, they were building a lot of new houses and everything, and I had pictures of buying one of those nice new little homes, you know. And he came home and he says, well, we shouldn't spend all that money on the house. So we bought an old house with an outdoor toilet and a heating stove in the dining room and no bathroom, and and I was very unhappy there. And so then his family was from a small town north of where I grew up in Decatur, and Maroa, Illinois, and so we bought a lot up there, and he and his dad built a house. They began talking about, servicemen could get schooling or something and everything.
GI Bill.
And he took the GI Bill and went to a school in Kansas City to repair shoes. He just decided he was going to have his own business and have a shoe repair shop. So we went to Kansas City then. We lived in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City,
Kansas
part of the time. And then when we got through there, he bought a shack, practically, in this little town of Maroa.
Looked like a shack to you. Huh?
And he bought out somebody that was closing up their shop that had the equipment that he needed, and so he bought that. His business just didn't do good because the family was fighting and everything. So he took the building, had it moved to Decatur then, 11 miles down the road. He bought rented a lot or something and set up a shoe business there. Well, that didn't work out too good. So then he ended up, he bought we were out on Benson Highway. It was before the freeways.
Yeah.
Benson Highway was the main road.
That was the main drag.
And all mobile homes, and people came out for the winter and rented the mobile homes. And there was a man that had an old school bus he'd converted into a grocery truck, and he had a route, and he went, and he had this business, and so he had it for sale. So Harold decided he'd try that. So he bought the bus and ran the grocery route, and he did that for a year or so. One thing, the guy told him the bus had just been completely overhauled, and he hadn't had it a week when it broke down, and he took it in the garage, and he says, "That thing in here again?" And so he was very discouraged, and so he...
Kind of like buying a horse with no teeth?
Yeah, so he ended up, he says, well, he put it up for sale and sold it, and we packed up what little bit we had and went back to Decatur. And we went back to Decatur, and he couldn't find a job he liked. I went to work in an insurance office then, and he was working for the railroad, and he was unhappy. And we bought a lot, vacant lot, and he started building a house, the plain old house, nothing. Outdoor toilet, no water in the house, an outside pump, and I was so unhappy. And we got a letter from his aunt and uncle in Arizona. His uncle had a big plumbing shop, and his aunt, I know it was his aunt's idea, she said if Harold would like to learn to be a plumber, that he could come and work for his uncle if we wanted to come back. And so we sold everything and
moved to Arizona.
Moved back to Arizona.
Yeah.
And never wanted to see Illinois again.
Yeah, forget that weather.
Yeah, this was actually taken in the park that was close to the plant that I was working in. And
this is as a security guard.
as a security guard.
Here, I'll trade you pictures.
Yeah, and this is my husband when he was taken in 1941. That was before he went overseas. This one was when my husband was overseas, and I had my daughter, and he had never seen her. In fact, she was about 2 months old before he even found out he had a daughter. And so I kept sending him pictures. We had pictures made. We went to, my sister and I both sent pictures constantly to our husbands. And I sent my husband this picture of Tina, and he went to an artist of some sort there, and the artist took this picture of Tina and Harold and made it look like he was holding her, and he had never ever seen her. And so we were quite proud of that, because it looked like, you know, she was. So it
Looks like he was holding her. Well, Bess, we'd like to thank you for taking your time to share with us. You proved the fact that the ladies behind the scenes were there, did real jobs, and supported their men during the wartime endeavor.